Hi, good evening, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 178 and 179. We'll be concluding Hilchos Me'ilo, chapter 5 until 8, and we'll start Hilchos Korban Pesach and Sefer Korbanos, Perek Aleph and Perek Beis. Our sage is teaching us that when we are concluding a Maseches or a tractate, or any significant book of Torah, it is Ayoime Tova LeRabbanon. It is a very festive day. So indeed, today is a very festive day when the conclusion of Seder Avodo starts and the beginning of Sefer Korbanos begins. I think it is appropriate to stand on and to zoom in on a general question based upon which principle, since in Sefer Avodo we have just learned about Ma'aseh HaKorbanos, Psulei HaMokdoshin. So the obvious question, what does it differ between the content of Sefer Korbanos and Sefer Avodo, since in Avodo we're describing all the rules of the Korbanos, and obviously soon we're going to learn about the Korbanos. Isn't Korbanos covers the Avodo and the general services which were done in Beis HaMikdash. So in fact, the Rambam himself, at the beginning of his book, when he is introducing the Mafteach, and he describes what made him to include in the book of Avodo particular halachos, and in the book of Korbanos, other halachos, so he defines that anything that belongs to Korban Tzibur and to a collective task and duty will be covered in the Seder Avodo, and anything that is related to the Yochid would be included in Sefer Korbanos. Though that we will find sometimes in Sefer Avodo a discussion about Avodos HaYochid, but nevertheless, the primary principle is the subject of the Tzibur. Happens to operate sometime in the field of the Yochid, but the general principles over there is the principle of has to do with the Tzibur. I think it is also ilah bekona echod overlaps with a very interesting question that in Chassidus we are covering. How come in the concept of Bechol Me'oidcho, which is the mitzvah of Mesirus Nefesh, happens to be mentioned only in Parsha Rishono and not in Parsha Shnio? In Parsha Rishono of Kriya Shema that we're reciting every day, there is a tzivui ve'ohavto es Hashem Eloikecho b'chol levovcho v'chol nafshecho v'chol meidecho. And the idea of b'chol meidecho is a reference to the utmost level of Mesirus Nefesh. And the question is, how come in Parsha Shnio the tzivui b'chol levavchem u'v'chol nafshechem, but nevertheless there is no mention about b'chol me'oidchem? And the general answer that is being given, since Parsha Rishono is referring to the Yochid, so from the Yochid you can demand from him ahavo v'chol me'odecho. But from the Rabbim, it is a general uniform and a general protocol that is shove lechol nefesh, and not necessarily the expectation should be about b'chol me'odecho from the Rabbim. B'chol me'odchem should not be. For that reason, it is also ilah bekona echod, that the idea of avodo refers to the tzibur. The level of korbanos, which echoes the idea of Mesirus Nefesh to the utmost, has to do with the concept of the Yochid. Al pi zeh, we understand something very interesting, that the first halachos in Sefer Korbanos, which is Korbanos HaYochid, starts with the Hilchos of Korban Pesach. And when we're going to look into the details of Korban Pesach, the obvious question will be, isn't Korban Pesach is something that is done bechavur, and though it is not, it's certainly not a yochid, certainly not ideally, but nevertheless, the entire schus that the Jews were zoiche to get the mitzvah of Korban Pesach was associated with a level of mesirus nefesh when they were tying those sheep, which happened to be the Avodah Zorah of the Mitzrim, and they were exposing themselves into such a harm, a mental enslavement, that they were accustomed to the Egyptian culture, and suddenly one day to go and demonstrate against what they have been accustomed, it was a level of mesirus nefesh, bechol meoidecho, and for that reason, very possible that Sefer Korbanos, as opposed to Seder Avodah, which is Merames on a higher level of Avodah Sayochid, happens to start with the idea of Korban Pesach. The last, or the halachos, that has to do with the first lesson 178. So the subject matter is the idea of ilah. Ilah is misappropriating the usage of an item that was dedicated to Hekdesh, whether it is Bedek Habayis, to the treasury of the Beis HaMikdash, whether it is a Kodshei Mizbeach, it will be subject to misappropriation until he redeems the item. Though that we mentioned that when it comes to Kodshei Bedek Habayis, just the financial linkage to the Hekdesh is already exposing the item and the person to a possibility of Me'ilo under any circumstances, while in Kodshei Mizbeach there is specific checklist, specific requirement in what situation the Me'ilo will be applicable. Nevertheless, though they are separate qualities, the Me'ilo can be mitztaref, added, if a person, for example, was benefiting half a pruto from Kodshei Mizbeach and half a pruto from the Kodshei Bedek Habayis, those two half of pruto of each and every one of them can be added into one Me'ilo. There is also a severity in Me'ilo when it comes to take a item that belongs to Hekdesh, eat it by yourself, and give to your friend to eat. Although you have not benefited from the part that your friend ate, nevertheless, since you have caused a misappropriation of the items that belongs to Hekdesh via you giving it to your friends, so despite the fact that you have not benefited, nevertheless, the liability of Me'ilo will be upon your shoulder. There is another severity, chumre, when it comes to the Me'ile, the accumulation of two events that took place in two different times with a major gap between them. Since when it comes to ma'acholos asuros, or even ma'acholos of mitzvah, in order for a achilo to be considered a ma'achol, not enough to have a kezais, but the speed of consuming the kezais must take place within the zman of kedei achilas pras. And if this requirement was not met, so there is no achile. But when it comes to me'ile, even though that there is a huge gap of time between half a pruto and the other half a pruto, nevertheless, I'm skipping the time gap and it will be mitztaref. There is liability in me'ilah only something that is detached from the ground. If something that is attached to the ground, a person cannot violate the aveil or the crime of me'ilah unless he managed to separate the item from the ground. So for example, if a person actually took the dust out of the ground and separated from the ground, obviously he violated me'ilah. On the other hand, if a person lived in a cave that belongs to Hekdesh, or he was under the shade of a tree that belonged to Hekdesh, no me'ilah was done on his part. On the other hand, if a person actually took stones, rocks that belongs to Hekdesh, and use those rocks to build a building, and then he benefited from this building, he will be violating misappropriation, the idea of me'ilah. And the reason, because at the building of those avonim which were Hekdesh, at that time they were not mechubar lakarka, they were not attached to the ground, they were detached from the ground. Anything that grows from Hekdesh is subject to me'ilah. For example, if a person took a field and he was designating the field to Hekdesh and the field produced fruit, a person will be subject to me'ilah if he benefited from those fruits. On the other hand, if a person took fruits that belong already to Hekdesh and planted them in the ground was not Hekdesh, the original fruit were only the fruit were Hekdesh. Now those fruit have produced a new generations of fruit, though that he needs to redeem the original fruit, but nevertheless the gidulin, whatever grew, will be chulin, though that he has the liability to pay the Hekdesh, and for that reason he cannot use those fruit in order to pay the keren and choimesh, but nevertheless the fruit themselves will be considered chulin, and for that reason those fruit, in case it was grain, he will be chayav in a foroshas chalo. As we have mentioned, that anything that is attached to the ground, and attached to the ground there is no me'ilah. For that reason there is no me'ilah when it comes to slaves. Since avodim hukshu lekarkoes, slaves, they have the same status as real estate, and for that reason not only I won't be mo'el in case I have benefited from the slave himself, but even from his hair, though I may say that there is kol ho'imed ligozes, since hair is about to be cut, so therefore I may view it as it is cut already, like I'm saying it in many other halachos in Torah, the principle of kol ho'imed. Nevertheless, since as long as the hair is upon his head, it keeps appreciating mashbiach, for that reason there is no me'ilah, even not in his hair as well. When it comes to the garments, bigdei kehuno, so when they are old and they're not usable any longer, so they become a property of kodshei bedek habayis and they will be subject to me'ilah. However, if they are still in use and they are considered to be chadoshim, new ones, since they were given to benefit from them by the kohanim, so therefore they are not subject to me'ilah. Anything that a non-Jew was dedicating to the Hekdesh, to Beis Hamikdash, so it depends what type of Hekdesh. If the Hekdesh is towards kodshei bedek habayis, so it will be subject to me'ilah. But if it is kodshei mizbeach, so there is no me'ilah, since it is written in the Torah that me'ilo applies only to Bnei Israel. Another item that me'ilo is not applicable, koil umar evreach, any type of a sound, any type of a vision, any type of a smell. A person benefited from hekdesh, it is not subject to me'ilo, since it is not a tangible benefit, though he should not benefit midirabanan, but nevertheless, the definition, the biblical definition of me'ilo is not applicable upon this. The second chapter is defining when the concept of me'ilo appear. And first, there is an introduction that there is two types of usage. There is object that durable goods which any benefits from them won't erode them and won't damage them. For example, golden vessels. Then there are objects that any benefit from them is eroding their quality and certainly some of the quantity. So when a person benefited from the first type, an item that is a durable good and it's not being eroded, just the benefit itself will make him a subject to me'ilo. However, those types of goods that usage in them will erode them, will damage them. So in order for the person to violate me'ilo, necessary, he should benefit with a shove pruto, and he should damage the item in the shove pruto in the simultaneously, and he should have also an intention to benefit. So any type of a good that the usage of this good will erode them, there is three requirements: intention, benefit, damage simultaneously. There is kodoshim tmimim. When it comes to items, animals that belongs to kodshim mizbeach, where a person uprooted their wool, though seemingly he took the wool out, not necessarily he should be poigem in order to violate the me'ilo, since by removing their hair, it's not going to disqualify them as a korban, so the me'ile will appear even though he did not damage them, because they are considered like kodoshim tmimim, blemishless type of animals. They are halachically compared to klei zohov, to golden items, that any use in those items is not eroding them, and therefore no pagam, no damage is necessary in order for the person to be violating me'ilo. When it comes to kodshei bedek habayis, an item that belongs purely just to the treasury of hekdesh, and there is only a financial shaychus to hekdesh. So for that reason, if a person have made a me'ile in a sense that he was taking this item unknowingly and giving it to another person as a gift, in such a case, he is the one who has violated unknowingly me'ilo, and he will be subject to the korban and to the payment and to the choimesh. But the person who actually received the gift, he won't be violating anything, since by him giving it to the other person and entering into effective me'ilo, so the person who received the item, at this point of receipt of the item, it's not anymore hekdesh, since the original person, the first person who gave it to him, he is ho'il b'masov. His deeds were effective. However, if he was not giving it to the others, then it will be mo'el achar mo'el. He will be violating me'ilo, and the other person will be violating me'ilo. For example, if a person used an axe of hekdesh and he was cutting the wood with this axe, and then he cut the wood and he benefited by a pruto, and he damaged the axe with a pruto, and he gave it to came the other person and did the same thing. Both of them have violated me'ilo. So this is when it comes to kodshi bedek habayis. When it comes to a behemo that belongs to kodshi kodshim, no matter whether he was giving it to his friend or whether his friend was just using it after him without the first person actually giving it to him, then the concept of mo'el achar mo'el, the idea of me'ilo after me'ilo, will remain, since the animal remains in the kedusha. However, if we're talking about kodshei mizbeach, that a mum fell in it and it's subject to a pidyon, to a redemption, at that point it's not purely kodshei mizbeach. So then, if he gave it to his friend, the first one committed me'ilo and the friend not, which is exactly like kodshei bedek habayis, since we're speaking over here about kodshei mizbeach who are subject to pidyon. When it comes to a pruto, a coin that belongs to hekdesh, and a person benefit, me'ila becomes effective only when he is using it for his own personal needs. To illustrate the concept, if there is a rack or a beam of hekdesh, just taking the rack or the beam is not turning this act into a me'ilo, unless he took the beam or the rack and placed it into a building that is in the process of completion. On the other hand, if a person took a pruto that belongs to hekdesh and gave it to the bath or any other service provider, though he was not using the service that he should be receiving in exchange of giving the pruto to this service provider, but nevertheless his access to these services is turning him into a person who violated me'ilo. Sometimes there is a situation where a person will use money which he embezzled, which he was mo'el from hekdesh, in order to bring a duty, a liability of korbanos, a chatos, a oshom. It's still going to be considered me'ilo. The me'ilo starts in this case when he's benefiting, and the benefit of hekdesh from the moment the zrikas hadam. There is another example when a person took the money of hekdesh and he used it to pay his machzis shekel. In such a case, the first animal which will be purchased from the money of the shkolim, which generally are channeled towards the zivchei tzibur and korban tomid shebechol yoim. So the first animal that will be purchased from the shkolim will turn him to a mo'el. When it comes to the Machzis HaShekel, there is a few interesting scenarios that are being displayed. And one of them, when a person actually appointed his friend to give his Machzis HaShekel to the Beis HaMikdash, and the friend took this Machzis HaShekel, and instead to fulfill the mission he was given by his friend, he was using to pay his own Machzis HaShekel. So depends at what point he has done this misappropriation. When he took it after the first Turumo was taken in Beis HaMikdash, then the friend, he will be a moyel. The reason, since in Beis HaMikdash, when they are taking the Turumo, they have in mind not only the shkolim which they received already, but also the shkolim which they are about to receive. So it includes also those receivable shkolim that are on the way. And that point when the friends was using this shkolim to pay his own chiyuv of Machzis HaShekel, so then it turns him to be a moyel. In the third chapter, there is a very interesting concept, and it is very appropriate since we have just finished Parshas Bereshis, where one of the central topics over there is the entire story with the snake. And Rashi tells us that though the snake had a good excuse to defend himself by saying Divrei Harav v'Divrei HaTalmid Divrei Mi Shoimim, who should have listened? Should she listen to the student, which is the Nochosh, or to listen to God? So she really has no excuse for violating, and this would be so-called a defense for himself. Nevertheless, this defense was not delivered or introduced since he was a masis and a person who is convincing and promoting others to do, influencing, persuading others to do wrong things. And ein mehapchim bischusoy, I would never introduce any defense which can help him. For that reason, he was punished without a chance of defense. This principle of Divrei Harav v'Divrei HaTalmid Divrei Mi Shoimin happens to be a reason which introduces another concept, Ein Shliach Ledvar Aveiro. Though in the Torah generally there is what we call shlichus, where a person can appoint somebody to do an act, a legal act on his behalf, though it was not done by him and it was done by a shliach. Nevertheless, the act will be linked to the meshaleach, to the person who appointed the emissary. Nevertheless, when it comes to an aveiro, when I'm appointing something to do an aveiro for me, the aveiro is not generally not going to be my liability. It will be the liability of the person who committed the aveiro. And the reason, Divrei Harav v'Divrei HaTalmid Divrei Mi Shoimin, who you should be listening. Should you be listening to the person who appointed you, which happened to be the student, or you should be listening to the words of God, who said that this is an aveiro and you are not allowed to do it. However, there is a few exceptions in the Torah that though it is an aveiro, nevertheless, yesh shliach lidvar aveiro. And this is one of the exceptions. When a person sending somebody to do me'ilo, misappropriate the funds of Hekdesh, so though it is an aveiro, and generally ein shliach ledvar aveiro, but when it comes to the me'ilo, the fulfillment of the shliach of the mission will cause liability upon the meshaleach, upon the person who sent him. And the reason, because there is a gzeiro shovo, the word of shlichus generally comes from Turmo, and the words Chet happens to be in Shlichus in Me'ilo, and the words of Chet happens to be also in Tumo. So though it is not written outright, but nevertheless, B'Gzeiro Shovo, I'm deriving it. However, since this is a exception, that the Maise ha-shliach, the act of the shliach, will be misyaches, will be credited, or in this case debited, towards the meshaleach. So there is specific requirement, and the requirement are that he must follow precisely the instruction of the meshaleach. At the moment that there is any deviation from the instruction that the meshaleach gave him, so then the shaliach, he will be the one who will be liable. The chidush, when it comes to shlichus lidvar aveiro in Me'ilo, that even he appointed a cheresh shoite v'koton, people who are not mentally mature, nevertheless, he will be the one who is the meshaleach, will be the one of the doing the me'ilo, liable for the me'ilo, as long as they follow precisely the instruction. If a person send with a shliach a puto that belongs to Hekdesh, and suddenly he remembered that the puto he sent with his shliach belongs to Hekdesh and he wants to take care of it. So the best solution is to take an object to another puto and announce that this particular object is in exchange of the puto that were sent with that individual. By doing so, he is removing the kedusha, the original kedusha, from the puto that he was sending with the shliach to that particular puto that he is poidet with. And now we're moving to lesson 179, which I would like to start with an introductory story, a story that took place a short while after the liberation of the Koisel Ma'arovi in the 6-day war. And somebody felt will be appropriate to send to the Rebbe as a gift some of the stones that were there from the Koisel. And immediately when the Rebbe received it back to him, he sent it back and he says to return them immediately where he took it from. And he explains because there is a cheshash, there is a suspicion of me'ilo, the same subject that we've been covering, and now we will be concluding it. And indeed, the first chapter of lesson 179 deals with extension and application of the concept of me'ilo into different other, not direct aspect. For example, when it came payment to the employees who used to work for the Hekdesh, so the way it was done, so first of all, any employee who works in a field of Hekdesh, so generally he will be entitled any type of service who is done by employee in a field under a certain condition, he has a right to benefit from the fruits, not in Hekdesh. The Kedusha, the holiness of Hekdesh, overrides his employee rights, which generally are given to him. Another severity which is being overridden as well, when an animal is working at the field, there is a prohibition of blocking the access to the food that is in the field. The prohibition is lo yisachsim shoyer b'disho, you should not block an ox while he is working at the field. However, since it is Hekdesh, it will be blocked. The reason, Bedishoy, you should not block the mouth, only daish, only type of work, holoi loi, that fits to him. But since it's Hekdesh, it's not loi loi. Another consideration will be applicable when it's about time to pay the employees of Hekdesh, and instead to pay them with an object, a commodity that belongs to Hekdesh, the only way that it will be permitted if I'm exchanging this type of Kedusha in the commodity into money, then I'm giving it to them only after the Kedusha was transferred from the object into money. I'm giving them the object. And step number 2, since if it happens to be an object that fits to Kodshe Mizbeach, fits to the altar, and I'm able to bring an offering, then the Mikdosh will buy it from them, the actual object, and then they can use the money. There is another special treatment which were applicable to the building materials that were built, since I'm taking so seriously the possibility of me'ilo. So the legal status of the avonim while they were built, they had a legal status of chulin. The reason, not to have a chance to cause those construction workers to benefit illegally from the avonim while they are working, whether to lean on them, whether to use them as a shield as a shade from the sun, or as a shield from the rain, or so on. So for that reason, they were chulin until after the completion of the building, which only then, after paying the contractors, then they have turned to be Hekdesh. Even the salt of Beis HaMikdosh, the salt that is being salted over the korbanos, will be considered Hekdesh, and it is prohibition to benefit. However, the salt that is being covered on top of the Mizbeach, or on the Kevesh, the ramp that led to the Mizbeach, there is no problem to benefit. It was a special Tnai Beis Din, a condition of Beis Din, not to be moil in them. Towards the end, the Rambam brings a very special lessons, a very ethical lesson a person can derive from Hilchois Me'ilo when it comes to serve God. And this is a very strong encouragement in the internal struggle a person will have with the dark forces who are constantly trying to overcome him. And he is zooming in on those type of mitzvahs which are considered chukim. While mitzvahs a person can find reasoning, it will be easier and very enthusiastic and encouraging to fulfill. However, those mitzvahs who are considered chukim, like korbanos, for example, beyond ta'am vodas, and constantly he is a target of criticism and mockery. So he says you can take a cue how to treat them seriously from Hilchois Me'ilo. Take a look, even an object like avonim ve'ofor, stones, woods, at the moment that they are belonging to Hekdesh, so they must be assigned to them with all the consequences that we have just learned. Allah has kamo vekamo when it comes to mitzvahs, which were given directly by God, how much more so respect and honor must be given and assigned to them. And a person should not take them lightly, and he should not be boyet bohem just because he doesn't know the reason. So Hadu on Aloch Seder Avoido, and Bruchim Aboim, and welcome to the Seder Korbanos. And as the first one is the halachos of Korban Pesach. And this particular mitzvah, though it is mitzvahs asay shehazman gromo, nevertheless, even noshim mechuyovim, they are committed in those mitzvah. This mitzvah is applicable to 14th day of Nisan after Chatzois. This is one exceptional mitzvah asay together with the mitzvahs of Milo, those two original mitzvahs which were given to us while we were in Mitzrayim and associated with blood, as we say bedomaich, plural, with your bloods, plural, chayi, you are going to get life. And they are the only mitzvahs asay that avoiding them is connected to chorus. This is one type of korban that even at the time when the bomois were allowed, Korban Pesach were forbidden, because there is a very specific place that they must be brought, and this is the Azor. It is very interesting to note that after the 6th day war, which initially looked that Yad Israel Tkifo, that the Jews have real independence there, the Rebbe suggested to consider the Deo of Rabbi Chiel Miparis, that even though that there is no Beis Hamikdosh, nevertheless, a person can and should bring a Korban Pesach as long as he knows the Mizbeach, and for that reason there is a chiyuv to bring a Korban Pesach. So the only way to be avoided from a chiyuv kores is by being in a state of derech rechuiko. For that reason, all Hasidim left Yerushalayim not to be exposed to the chiyuv of Korban Pesach and avoiding them, which associated with those consequences. However, a while later, since unfortunately with the general behavior of the decision-making personas in Israel, demonstrating that really Yad Yisrael is not Tkifo, so the Rebbe stopped to encourage this type of practice. There is also a prohibition to have in a possession of a person a kezais chometz while the person while the Korban Pesach is being slaughtered. If a person violated this, though the malchus he gets, nevertheless the korban is still kosher. There is no sprinkling the blood on the corners of the mizbeach, but there is a shficho keneged esoid. Just pour the water right on the esoid, on the base of the mizbeach. The removal of the internal organs and the imurim, first placing the imurim on top of the mizbeach to burn it, and then taking the flesh with the owner of the korban to his home, where the roasting of the Pesach is being done at his own personal home. The slaughtering of the Pesach was done with three groups. Kohol Eido Ve'Yisrael was associated, accompanied with the reading of the Hallel, the blowing in the trumpets. Even if it falls on Shabbos, it will override the Shabbos, since it is b'moyadoi av b'Shabbos, b'moyadoi av b'tumo. However, the activities that can be done before Shabbos should not be done on Shabbos. And now we will summarize the third chapter of this lesson, that though in principle a person can be the sole owner of the Korban Pesach, the sole participants of the Korban Pesach, as long as he is capable and he fits to eat the entire sheep, nevertheless, the mitzvah, he should join a chaburo, and it should be done liminui of people who actually have a subscription to the korban. At most, the subscription must take place while the korban is still alive. The quality of the people who wants to subscribe is very specific, and here are the stipulations. Ability of each and every member of the chavur to be able to eat a kezais. For that reason, if a party that entirely consists of elderly people or sick people, they cannot join together for a Korban Pesach because the possibilities, the chances for them to disqualify the Korban by having a leftover is quite high. For that reason, I would stay away from a chavur that they are all geirim, since they will apply extra stringencies which are not necessarily halachically right. They may lead to unnecessary noisel of the Pesach. On the other hand, I would also stay away from creating a chavur or a company which consists of noshim avodim unktanim, since I want to avoid a pritzus. Nevertheless, if all the subscriptions, the people who are subscribed to the Korban, they are all problematics, they have an issue, so then the Korban Pesach will be possible. If only part of them are problematic, if a person, for example, part of the members are cholim, part of them are brim, then the Korban will be kosher as long as the time of the zriko, his thought were not mixed, and having in mind also people who are posul. A person can appoint another person without his knowledge, as long as the person happened to be a minor and a eved, a servant. For people who are independent, he must be done on their consent, though a consent can be achieved just a pure silent, which indicates retroactive consent. When it comes to a lady that is not clear whether she's after her husband or after her father, as long, and let's say for example her father have made her joint on his behalf, the husband made her joint on her behalf, so as long as she is at the house of her husband, so the shchito, the slaughter of the Baal, that's what makes the decision. But when she's right after her marriage, she tends to be heading towards her father's house. So at the first regel, at the first holiday after the marriage, the father, he will be the one that will be determining that she is actually subscribed to his korban. After the first holiday, it will be dependent upon her. There is no limit how many people can subscribe to the Korban Pesach, as long as each and every one will get a kezais. If the amount of people were added to such extent that the members won't have a kezais for each and every one of them, so those members who have joined the Korban after a shiur of kezais to each and every one of them is being tempered and violated, the last ones will be removed until each and every member will have a kezais. If a person added more subscribers without the knowledge of the other members of the subscription, so the chavur, the group, will give him his part and let him to be a righteous one and divide it amongst the new subscriber that he joined to the Korban Pesach. Same thing will appear if a person tend to overeat. So the members of the Korban, they are entitled to cut his part and give it to him in order to avoid him eating into their parts as well. Thank you very much and all the best.